Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. My name is Shuart. I'm the Schoharie County historian, and I have a little presentation on the Battle of Cobus today, a battle that a lot of people don't know too much about, but which is very important in many ways. It's also, since the land the battlefield was fought on is mostly owned by the college today and its farmland. You can still go out there. We've been picking up musket balls with metal detectors and a few other artifacts that have been picked up over the years. Anyhow, I'll start the presentation. So that's actually the view from the Waterville Cutoff. There's a hiking trail. Some people, SUNY Cobus still has it. It's the creek trail. It's about a mile out and a mile back. And on the far left, way down in the right center, there's a clump of trees under like a little pointy mountain. That's where I think the actual battle, there's an ambush in the battle where most of the casualties are taken. And I think that's where the actual battle site is today. There are those who disagree with me, but from what I put together, I'm pretty sure that's the site. Anyhow, it all begins in 1752 when Jacob Borst and others purchased 3 patents. It's kind of interesting when you look into the patents that at one time people were granting or receiving these enormous grants, 10,000 acres, 100,000 acres. There was a governor in the early 1690s who basically gave most of the, not only all of New York State away, but one of the grants extended to the Pacific Ocean. And so they were deemed extravagant. Also, England is a small country, and even royal families sometimes have no more than 1,000 or 2 acres on their estates, if that. So for commoners to possess that kind of land, many of these people would be commoners, was extravagant. So they limited it to 2,000 acres unless you get others to sign with you. And what's normally done, Sir William Johnson was famous for this. He'd get all his employees to sign on as partners on this huge grant, and then they'd all sell it to him for a nominal fee, and he would throw a huge party, and everybody was happy, and he just added 100,000 acres to his holdings, But some people abuse it. But in any case, these are 3 lots of about 6,000 acres each, and so Jacob Borst and others purchased these patents. What I find interesting too is Peter Nicholas Summer is the first Lutheran minister in Schoharie, and Palatine House Museum is his home. He's one of the ones that buys one of the northern grants. Apparently he was making enough money, even with a wife and 5 or 6 kids at that point. He had enough money, it was cheap enough, that he bought it, and he got 100 acres, which afterwards Jacob Borst went around and got everybody to sell to him. And Nicholas Summer picked up a grant of land where a Lutheran church is still standing up there today in the town of Sharon that was built on his property. And he became the minister of it later. It was his farm. Now you can see Cobus on the bottom there. That rectangle, triangular type thing on the bottom that encompasses the Cobus Creek, and what is but anyhow, the lower left is where all the action is going to take place on that map. And so Cobus named for Jacobus Cobus. There's a lot of, well, everybody gets this wrong. In history books, there's a lot of contention. It's actually pretty simple. The village and town became known by his last name, but it never was his last name. His name was Cobus, and he was interested in a kill that ran into the Schoharie. But he never developed it. In 1723, Cobus was part of the big German migration to Tulpehocken, Pennsylvania. And interestingly enough, 30 years later, the French and Indian War would start in Pennsylvania with the Cobus massacre. The murder, the massacre was one of the sons of Jacobus Cobus. But anyhow, So same for him. He never sees the mill, never does the mill. Niska has moved there, but then it will carry the name forever. And over time, it changed from Cobus to Coble. During the Revolution, I used the name, this spelling, exclusively Cobus, because during the entire Revolution, that's what it's called. And the 1823 Gazetteer of the State of New York has an asterisk next to the name Cobuskill, and you go to the bottom of the page, and it says the residents all insist this is the wrong name. It's Cobuskill, which ironically most of the locals pronounce it that way. Anyhow, little trivia there. So originally, the first two families that settled that land were the Borsts, or the Schaefers rather. They were. Let me go back. Must be coming in. And then you got the Schaefers are the first two people to settle it. They're cousins from down in the Hudson Valley, and they settled about 1752, maybe even a little earlier. But then the French and Indian War comes, and there's no more settlement. Everybody's terrified. It's the frontier. They're afraid of the Indians, and so everything kind of comes to a halt. And then the war pretty much ends in America in 1760. And that's where other families come in. They bought these land, these lots, and they're coming in. So now you got the Browns, the Firsters, Freemeyers, and Warriors. Konigs, which are actually king. After the war, that'll be spelled king. Konig is German for king. And then the Shells, and the Warners, and the Z's. So mostly pretty familiar names in the county today. And community, there it is. That round hill in the middle, with the circle in the middle, the old quad of Cobusco College is on top of that today. Up on the upper right, you would, let me just see if I can show it up here. Yeah. It'd be my van white. So this is the, where the college is today. Walmart is right there. The main intersection in Cobusco with the traffic light is right here. This is the Bull's Head Inn. The Firster House was there before the Bull's Head Inn. And so this is all Cobusco. Way up here is Christian Brown. He's the captain. It's actually off of this map. But he's the militia captain, and people will assemble. Down here is where everything happens, the George Warner farm. And I think Z's farm was here. Others tell me I'm crazy. It's down here. The Z cemetery is here. But there's too much evidence showing that they're up here at this time. And so anyhow, that's contention. But the Z's are the farthest west. George Warner's farm is the farthest south. Thank you. You can just set that anywhere. And next. Then they get these, the settlement begins. The farms, as I saw, was that were spread out along 3 miles of the creek. This is a German community. The Schoharie is German, Cobusskill is German. Everybody speaks German except for some of the Dutch. And everybody speaks Mohawk too. They've lived with them for 60 some odd years. But this is Yankee stuff. This is out in Boston, and it's kind of far away. Communications are slow. On the other hand, the political discontent has been building for a while, and people are starting to take sides. And ironically, or it's interesting to me, that this is all Albany County at the time, Schoharie and that. But the far northwest corner of Schoharie County was part of Tryon County. Tryon County is also William Johnson. You get north of that line, and you're one of Johnson's people, and he was pretty good to people. If you're south of that line, you're with the Albany Patriots generally. So Cobusskill, south of the line, it's right on the line. Sharon, and what's now Sharon and Seward and Carlisle, that's New Rhinebeck and New Turlock. They mostly go with Johnson, with the British, because even though Johnson had died a year earlier, they're still in that county and Johnson's people. But so it's really not touching this way. 1775 comes and goes. They put together some stuff, but nothing's really happening. And a committee of safety was formed, and Johannes Ball of Fuchsdorf, actually that word is spelled F-U-C-K, which is why, it's pronounced F-U-C-K, which is why we use Fox today, I think. So nobody would want to call it by its original name. But anyhow, George Warner Sr. was elected to represent Cobus. This historical marker is right in front of the Carrot Barn in Schoharie. If you had left, Johann Ball House is still there. And actually, the commissioner of New York State, his name is Ball, and he's a descendant. He lives there.
And when was the Committee of Safety formed?
1775, at the beginning of the war. I brought a heckler with me. So anyhow, Cobusville forms a small militia company. Generally, an infantry regiment is 8 regular companies at that time, and normally a company would be 60 or 70 men. But this is militia; it's not Continental Army. They do what they can. Cobusville's company is at full strength, maybe 25 men and boys, and mostly from the same 10 families. And so they're pretty small, and of course you can't get them all together at one time. Christian Brown, who had the farm up at the far left there, he became captain, and Jakob Borst became lieutenant. And they tried to get a 5th company planned for neighboring Turlock and New Rhinebeck, but as I said, they were mostly the British. In 1777, 80 of them will go up and join the British at Fort Stanwix, and I'll get into that in a minute, but that's a lot of people for that community. So it left very few on the Patriot side. There were a few notable ones, notably Sebastian France. He lived there, he's still recognized as a Patriot. Anyhow, the war, as I said, began in 1775, and the Mohawks had always been down there, Wilder Hook, down near Roman's Nose. The Mohawks had just purchased Boragers Berry Farm there, 60 acres right next to their old village, so they're coming back. But anyhow, they had always lived there. Was a small village. At the time the war started, maybe 30 people, men, women, and children. And sometimes the village was big, sometimes it was small. A lot of neighboring people would come in and winter there and then go. But one day they noticed it's empty. No smoke coming from the fires, and a few people wander on into the village. And I think they found an elderly woman in her bed who'd been left behind, and a couple of dogs that stayed, and it was empty. They didn't know where they went. But they went down on the Susquehanna River down towards Binghamton, Unadilla, and 20 miles south of there is Oquega, and that's where Joseph Grant had moved. And there's another interesting sidelight. His first wife was a Mohawk woman, and they were very happy living up in Schoharie, had a nice farm up there, and she died, and he remarried in Oneida, and because he married out of tribe, he's still a Mohawk, but he can't live in that village. Same thing if you marry within your clan. If you're a Wolf clan and you marry somebody in Wolf clan, you're still Mohawk, you can't live there. That's what Schoharie is all about. It's an outcast village of many, sometimes Mohegans, Delawares, mixed people, Huron prisoners, Mohawks, and so on. And so that's where Oquega is also. It's in the Oneida territory, and so he's living there at the time the war begins. And anyhow, the war finally comes to Schoharie. In August of 1777, what's happening is General Burgoyne of the British has envisioned this grand plan, this grand assault coming from 3 directions. He's coming down from Canada, down Lake Champlain, down Lake George, and then down the Upper Hudson, and he's going to seize Albany. Meanwhile, General Howe is to take his big army that's in New York City and come north and work up the Hudson and take Albany. And a 3rd raid, Barney St. Ledger, he's a colonel in the British Army. He's out at Fort Niagara. He's to come east and work his way all the way down the Mohawk Valley and unite at Albany. They all come together. The revolution is split in half. New England is completely cut off from the other colonies, and it's really going to be a blow to the Patriots. So anyhow, most of the militia in Schoharie County has been called up to go and fight Burgoyne. There's going to be between 12 and 15,000 men on the American side at the Battle of Saratoga, mostly raw militia like the Schoharie men, but lots of men. And that leaves the valley almost defenseless. And so a Tory uprising begins. One is Colonel George Mann, or Captain George Mann, Mann's Tory Tavern in Schoharie. He's a company commander in the Albany County Militia, American. He assembles his militia. They're going to go to Saratoga. Instead, he announces, we're changing sides. We're going to go to the Mohawk Valley and join St. Ledger. And some of the men protest. A few are arrested. Some just go home, and some stay with Mann. A good handful stay with Mann. He has a couple of Schoharie Indians with him. And so they hold the tavern. You got everybody else is called out. Meanwhile, in the southern county, a fellow named John McDonald. He unites those Tories from New Dorlock and Rhinebeck, sharing Carlisle and Seward today, and with the Tories from the Charlotte Valley, Charlottesville and that area down, and he's got 80 men, and now he's at the Adam Chrysler farm down in Schoharie. So you got these two large bodies of men, and the Americans basically have like 5 committee men in the Becker Stone House in Middleburg, which will later become the Middle Fort, and they don't know what to do. They got the doors locked, and they're just waiting. John Harper comes by. He's a colonel with the Tryon County Militia. And he hears what's happening. He makes his famous ride. There's more to it, but it's a long story. But anyhow, he makes his ride to Albany, and he catches a troop of cavalry, 28 men under this crazy French Captain de Vergenoy, I think it is, and de Vergenoy. They're headed to Saratoga, and he stops them and reroutes them to Schoharie. And in the early morning, they ride all night. In the early morning, they come riding up, thundering up on horses. Cavalry's a brand new thing. These are dragoons, they're called, but cavalry's a brand new thing. It's a brand new army, and the United States had almost no cavalry. And it's kind of scary when you're on foot. You got men on horseback with sabers hacking at you, you know. And so 28 men is not a lot, but it's a good number for the area. So he comes in, and they have a French horn, a bugle, and they blast it as they're coming into the tavern at first light. They scatter Mann's men. Mann runs and hides for a while on Terrace Mountain, and people bring him food, and eventually surrenders. They take some of his men prisoner. They go down the valley. They get to the Becker house. They have no jail, so they put all the prisoners on the roof of the house and take away the ladder. And leave them, and then they go down to, and meanwhile, the first man killed in the Revolution is there. They have taken one of the Indians they took prisoner at Mann's Tavern, attempts to get away when they're near a swamp down towards Middleburg at Hartmannsdorf. And they shot him and wounded him. He was no match for men on horseback. They shot him and wounded him. And then de Vergenoy executed him, which a lot of people thought was just nasty. Anyhow, so now they go on to Adam Chrysler's farm. They had 80 men, but 50 of them are back with McDonald and Chrysler, they have 30 at Chrysler's farm. But they're well armed, they're in the woods. The cavalry charges them as the first cavalry charge in the history of the United States Army. Even though they lose 9 horses and 1 man killed, 1 man mortally wounded, 1 wounded, and inflict no casualties on the enemy, they completely scatter. And these guys are gone. They go and join Barry St. Ledger at Fort Stanwix. And as I said, 80 men will eventually join. 50 of them will join the King's Royal Rangers, Sir John Johnson's regiment. So that's the flocking. Now we're in the war. Now it's come home. Meanwhile, up in Saratoga, many of you probably know the story, but it's the first big American victory of the war, and it changes everything. Burgoyne, who was going to take Albany, surrenders with his 8,000 remaining men, and that army is gone. That piece is off the board. And then, meanwhile, Anyhow, it's going to change the face of the whole war. The British are pretty good at much going to give up on the North. And Mohawk Valley, British Colonel St. Ledger, he defeated the Americans horribly at Oriskany, but then could not take Fort Stanwix and gave up. And he left so suddenly, and he appeared so cowardly that his own Indians turned on him. And all the way during the retreat, his men were being attacked by Indians. Nobody killed, but their weapons are taken away, their goods are taken away. His men are stripped all the way by angry Indians who had been their allies. So that's a mess, and that's done. And Howe said, oh, I never got the orders. He went and took Philadelphia instead. He wasn't even a part of it while Goins desperately sending notes, please, please, please help. He's on his way to taking Philadelphia. So there's the war there. So it's definitely shifting south. Meanwhile, they're going to unleash the Indians and the terror in New York. I put this in basically, it just kind of puts a perspective on where we are in the war, and I really like this painting. So, anyhow, Washington now, he's lost badly in New York City in 1796, retreats into New Jersey. He had 20,000 men in New York City, including militia, retreats into New Jersey with 2,500 out of 20,000. And his militia have gone home, he's down to Continentals, and they take an entire German, Hessian, British regiment at Trenton, and then they go into camp for the winter. And a lot of us know about Valley Forge, a hard winter. Meanwhile, Massachusetts, America was really kind of afraid of standing armies. They didn't like the British, they didn't want long-term armies. They kept recruiting men for short terms. So when the war starts, 3 months. And then they re-recruit many of the same men and new men for 9 months. And then they say, you know what, we're going to get serious, we're recruiting for a year. And they recruit for a year, and the war, they realize the war is going to go on for a long time. And they quit all the fear of a big standing army, and they recruit Continentals, 3-year minimum or for the war. And the rewards, if you enlist for the war in bounty, and that would be even better than a 3-year man. And many men do to sign up, however it takes a long in. And so they've got now a standing, small but really solid standing army. So they're officially become a regiment January 1st, 1771. They're still recruiting in the spring of, or 1777, rather. And they're still recruiting in the spring of 1777. They're slowly coming together. And at that time, too, every regiment has to send all their men to the smallpox hospital. In this case, it's in Cambridge, I think, or Boston. Everybody gets smallpox. Most of them survive. And the ones who don't, so now when they join the army, they're immune to smallpox, but some of them are pretty shaky. Some of them are in the hospital for a while recuperating, and like I said, a handful will die. But anyhow, so the men are slowly coming out of hospital and then being sent in dribs and drabs to the army. And for the most part, they're northeastern Massachusetts. Actually, 1.5 companies were from Maine. Maine is all part of Massachusetts at that time. And a good number of men in one company was actually Nova Scotia, Canada, in that regiment. So they're all down-easters from Maine to Gloucester to Boston. And this one company, one of the older companies, was mostly men from Plymouth and Nantucket, a few from Martha's Vineyard, and scattered around that part of Massachusetts. Also, I looked into it, the brown jackets. I wanted to find out what uniform, and I looked into it quite a bit. And the brown jackets are what the 6th Massachusetts would have been early war. You don't start seeing the blue, with the red facings. They had blue with white facing, blue with red facing. And anyhow, this is the standard uniform for this regiment. And more than 240 of the men were officers officers and men were veterans. And some people, the story is told when they go to Cobus, they don't know anything about fighting Indians. They're green recruits. Yeah, they're young. The youngest killed in Cobus was 13 years old. He's not a drummer boy. He's a soldier. So they're very young. But these guys, Alexis and Concord, Jonas Belknap, had just turned 15 years old when he fought beside his father at the Battle of Bunker Hill. His father died of heat stroke. He enlisted as a 3-month man, then a 9-month man, then a 1-year man. At Cobus, he's 2 weeks past his 18th birthday, but he's a veteran of everything. And so these guys are young, but they're tough. And they fought Indians at Fort Edward, Fort Anne during the Saratoga campaign. One of the captains was captured by Indians at the Cedars. Another captain was captured at Fort Edward a year later. And so these guys are seasoned veterans, as young as they are. You know, even Lieutenant Jonathan Maynard, who will be at Cobus, he had quit. He was a student at Harvard, and he quit, became an officer almost immediately. Benedict Arnold had a fleet on Lake Champlain. Robert Allen was the captain of a sloop, and his lieutenant of Marines was Jonathan Maynard. Captain Allen will command a company in this new regiment, and Jonathan Maynard will be his lieutenant in that regiment. But so these guys are even veterans of the fleet and all that the naval battles on Lake Champlain. They've done it all. And again, their dribs and drabs are going to Saratoga. Some complete companies. They join the American Army under General Schuyler at that time at Fort Edward. They fight at Fort Edward. They fight at Fort Anne. They take some serious casualties of the Indians in one of those fights. And again, they lose one of their captains. He'll be a prisoner for 3 months and be released when they win at Saratoga. So some of these companies are heavily engaged. Other guys are still coming out of the smallpox hospital in Boston. But anyhow, they lost 7 men in September. They weren't in the battle at Freeman's Farm too much. A few of the men were. But again, a lot of skirmishing. And then they played a big part at Bemis Heights. So one of the men that stormed the redoubt with Benedict Arnold. Anyhow, they go into garrison duty in Albany, and at that time too, Albany's full of prisoners. They take all those thousands of prisoners from Saratoga. The Germans are sent to different places, and actually 15 Germans will go to Boston and enlist in this regiment in the next couple of months at Captain Allen's company. So he starts the year with a bigger company and a lot of Germans in it. Meanwhile, they were supposed to send the British home. They were going to be exchanged and send them home. And something goes wrong in the negotiations. The Americans get in a tiff, and they'll start juggling those British soldiers from point to point for the rest of the war. They'll put them here for a while, and then at camp here for a while, move them to another state, and keep them confused. And meanwhile, the Germans, a lot of them were enlisted in the American cause, and some of them just came to work here. So the last man killed in Schoharie County during the Revolution was a Hessian prisoner who was working at a farm, and the Indians mistook him for a local. And so the Germans were scattered all over. But anyhow, we took Walter Butler was taken prisoner during the Oriskany campaign. He had the gall to go to the American side with a small party of British and openly try to recruit for his side in the middle of American territory. Right after Oriskany, he gets arrested. He winds up in Albany, he manages to bribe somebody and escape in April of 1778, while the 6th Massachusetts is guarding him. It's a black mark for them. And Joseph Grant, interesting guy. You can go on and on. You could do a whole program on him. But his sister Molly famously became common law wife. In Indian terms, I think they were legally married, but common law wife of Sir William Johnson. A few people referred to her as housekeeper, but she definitely was head of household there. Anyhow, her little brother Joseph is 13. There's also been a contention that I've read this over and over. People think he's a half-breed because of the name. He's not. He's a full Mohawk. His name is Thayan Nagia, and he was born in the Ohio country when he was little. His father was killed in a hunting accident when he was an infant. It happens all the time here. They're hunting deer, and his father got in the wrong place, and somebody accidentally shot him. He was supposed to be sitting, and while the drivers went to him, and instead he moved. So Anyhow, he comes back. There's a man named Brant connected with the family, which is how he gets the name, but it's a matriarchal society. The father's surname means absolutely nothing. Everything is on the mother. So father's surname wouldn't matter. Only the women can vote in this society. Only the women can select chiefs and vote for them. Women have the power of veto over anything the men's council decide. All the leaders are men, but they're voted for by women. It's a neat kind of balance. And we got to talk to Brant's great-great-great-great-granddaughter a couple of years ago. She went to Cobus College for Wildlife and Fisheries. And she was very informative on that. But she said Joseph could never be, the women would never select him as a chief. That was one thing. As important as he could not be a chief. He was too influenced by whites. He lived with Sir William Johnson since he was 13, gone to college in Connecticut, and all that, so he could never be a chief, but he was selected war chief, which was a different thing of the overall Iroquois nation when the war started. Anyhow, so at the age of 13, Joseph fought with Sir William Johnson's first battle. He related later he was so scared he tied himself to a tree so he couldn't run. But then he gets educated at Reverend Eleazar Wheelock School in Connecticut. That is actually the beginning of Dartmouth College. At first it's all for Indians. The famous Samuel Kirkland, who will bring the Oneidas in on the American side, is a classmate of Joseph's. And eventually, financially, it falls apart. He moves it to New Hampshire, begins it again. He soon has more white students than Indians, and it becomes Dartmouth College. So essentially, Joseph Brant is one of the first graduates of Dartmouth College. Also trained and served as a minister for a while and translated at least 2 books of the Bible, the Gospel according to Mark and the Book of Acts. He did all into Mohawk. And he would spend time in the village just doing religious writings and religious study. And Mary, of course, she Mary became, if she was not already, the most powerful woman in the Iroquois nation. In a matriarchal society, nobody had more power than Molly Brant. Joseph Brant had really worked that out well. The most powerful nation of Indians in North America, and he's married to the head of them all. So it works out very, very well. And anyhow, when Sir William Johnson dies, Guy Johnson, his son-in-law, his nephew, is appointed superintendent of Indian Affairs, and Joseph Brant becomes his secretary. Joseph would wind up with the rank of captain. He may have gotten it here, but I think it came later. But anyhow, they're all for bringing the Iroquois in the war. The Iroquois, a lot of them want neutrality, but Brant is pushing for it. Meanwhile, Governor Carleton's snowing. He didn't want the bad press. I don't want Indians. I don't want scalping. I don't want atrocities. I don't want the bad press. I don't want any of it. You keep your Indians. And so that was his and he's Governor General. He's also the chief military officer of all of Canada. So Joseph goes to England, and he went there to discuss the native world. He becomes a celebrity. That's where you see a couple of the greatest portraits of Brant painted by famous artists. But I love the story when he meets the king and queen. There's a receiving line. The Iroquois have always said they're not part of Great Britain. They're an independent nation. If you even suggested that at a meeting with the Iroquois in their village, they would cut your head off. They are an independent nation. They have nothing to do with Britain other than being allies. And so the receiving line, everybody's going up, and the king and queen are side by side, and the king would hold out his hand, and you kiss the king's ring, and then kiss the queen's ring. And he comes to Joseph, and he stands there, and he says, as a representative of a free and independent nation, I decline to kiss the king's ring, but I'm happy to kiss the queen's. They loved him. The king personally saw to it. He became a Freemason, presented his apron to him in that ceremony. Joseph, by now, definitely is captain in the British Army, the only native person to ever hold that rank in the British Army, and he'll be the only native person to ever command British regulars in battle. And so it's a big deal. And anyhow, he gets back and works his way up through the wilderness with a friend from New York City, which is British held. And he gets to the Susquehanna Valley, And he has a meeting. They don't want war necessarily. Joseph's hoping the Americans will come and join his side, and Herkimer's trying to see where Joseph's intentions are. George Herkimer, he has 380 militiamen. Grant has 80, but he bluffs Herkimer into thinking he has 500. He has his men out in the woods whooping and then moving and whooping. And you're surrounded, buddy. And then you have the whole thing. It's just nothing happens. They get nothing, resolved, and they break up. And so Joseph then goes and joins Barry St. Ledger in the Mohawk Valley. He's that western wing that's kind of come down and supposedly take Albany. And Joseph sets up the ambush. It's brilliant. It's launched a little prematurely, but what is happening is Fort Stanwix is under siege by Barry St. Ledger. He's got cannons and Indians and hundreds of men. The Americans are defending the fort. They're doing a great job, but sooner or later they're going to run out of food. And so the Mohawk Valley militia is called together. General Herkimer is at their head. He's the overall commander, and he marches with 800 men. It's 5 companies, big companies of the a lot of companies of the militia, and Grant catches them in a brilliant ambush. At the end of it, it's hours of fighting. It only ends because there's a major Marinus Willett back at Fort Stanwix who realizes there's a big fight going on, and the Indians have all left their camps. They're scanning the camps with binoculars, nobody there. He takes a couple of carts and he runs out with a few hundred men out of the fort gates, completely loots the Indian camp. And the Oneida Indians help them. There were British guards at a bridge down there, and Oneida pretended to be a Mohawk. They had all spoke the same language. He runs up and says, "You're needed at the battle now." And the captain of the British with his whole company trots off towards Oriskany, and then they, "Okay, come on, it's clear." And anyhow, Willett strips their camps. They also do some damage to the Tory camps, and he comes back loaded with supplies. Meanwhile, the word goes out. Joseph Grant starts famously yelling, "Una, una, una," which means, get together and let's get the heck out of here. And they go back. It's too late to save their camps. The women who were there are scattered, but they've lost weapons, food, blankets, religious items that they had sacred bundles for war, gone, stripped. They're furious. And like I said, they're eventually going to turn on St. Ledger. But that saves the Americans, and out of the 800 men, about 150 walk out of there, dragging what wounded men they can. It is a total massacre. The numbers of killed range from 270 to 400, and for weeks you couldn't go near the area for the smell of the bodies. It was a horrible thing for the Americans. But in the end, St. Ledger's got to give it up. He can't take the fort. John Butler then, he's been with the King's Royal Rangers and the Indian Department, actually, and he's at the Battle of Oriskany. He's been wanting his own regiment, like Sir John Johnson has the King's Royal Rangers. So finally he gets permission to raise a regiment while he's at Stanwix, and then they go to Fort Nyack, where they fall back. He's supposed to have 8 companies. By April 1778, he's got 2, and the 3rd company barely started. They need recruits, and that's one of the things Cobus is going to be about. And meanwhile, something really big happens. France joins the war on the American side. It's going to take 2 months for the word to get up to Albany, and then they're going to fire every cannon in the city for joy. But now it's a global war, and we don't look at it like that. They've been fighting America. Now they got to fight France. They got valuable interests in the West Indies. They got to get the Navy to the West Indies. They got to get troops at the forts. They got to fortify Jamaica and everything else down there, Bermuda. It's going to be sucking troops away from the main army. Meanwhile, there's always been this belief that the South is full of patriotic king's people who are just dying for the chance to enlist. So they're kind of focused on that. But they keep New York. Meanwhile, in March, the Patriot leaders in Albany are holding a council. They're still trying to keep the Iroquois out of the war. The Oneidas are interested in neutrality, or are on the American side. The Onondagas are interested in neutrality. Tuscaroras usually do what the Oneidas want them to. They're actually part of the Oneida. And a handful of Cayugas and Mohawks attend. No Senecas attend. And the important thing is, at the time this war starts, the Mohawks have maybe 80 warriors in their whole nation. The Oneidas have maybe 140, 150. The Senecas have 1,000. And so they are by far the biggest, most dangerous part of that. And Senecas, they had lost too many. They had 17 men killed at Oriskany, and they don't like taking casualties, and they were bitter. There's no way they were going to change sides now. The British had managed, when they were originally looking for neutrality, the British had managed to suck them in big time, and they're allies now. It's Governor Clinton. Meanwhile, reports are all coming in. The hospitals at Albany are full of British wounded who are now recovered pretty much. So they got way too many British prisoners in Albany. Refugees have been trickling in during the whole war. It's a small city. They can't handle any more people. Their biggest fear is people coming in from the frontiers and jamming them off. They just can't handle it. And now they're getting reports. Meanwhile, Curry Valley was a prime target, farthest out on the frontier, all American patriots. A lot of their men have been killed at Oriskany, so they were very much under strength in the militia. And there's some important Americans who live there. So they're going to hit that first probably. And the Oneida Indians are always there as our spies, always on our side. They come in and say, get the heck out of here, it's coming. And some families do. More families go into Albany or Schenectady and that. So a few families did leave. And meanwhile, they say, you got to send soldiers out there, the people are going to get scared and they're all going to come in. No. And meanwhile, Grant leaves Fort Niagara, begins the summer campaign. He has, by all accounts, about 80 men with him. That includes Lieutenant Fry's one company, Butler's two complete companies, and he also has his own volunteers, but at that time, 30, maybe 40 men. And then there's a small party of Cayuga Indians, 10 or 12 men, and the Schoharie Indians are also about 10 or 12. So he's got upwards around 80, they figure when he leaves. And he's got to rescue, there's a lot of Mohawks who are still claiming neutrality and living in the Mohawk Valley. And eventually they're going to lose their homes, be arrested. Philip Schuyler will intervene and make sure they all get released. He tries to get their land back, he can't. But anyhow, Grant could see this coming. He's trying to get them out of there, but he couldn't convince them to leave. But they're also desperate for recruits. Butler needs those men. And there's going to be a huge attack in the Wyoming Valley in June, and involving several thousand men. And they're assembling a force at Unadilla, and they need food. So Grant's got all the sheep, cattle, hogs, anything he can get. He'll be bringing it down to Unadilla to feed that army. So he's got a multitasking here. He's got a lot to do. And he moves to his old small command at Oquaga, his hometown, south of Unadilla. And then words of the plan to attack the Wyoming Valley in Pennsylvania start trickling through, exaggerated numbers, but they know something big is going on in the frontiers. And meanwhile, people are getting restless, and General Stark, he's the man on the left, he orders Captain Patrick to take a company of the 6th Massachusetts, and they're building forts in Schoharie at that time. None of them were complete, but he takes his command to the Becker Stone House at Middleburg, which is partially built into a fort. And Grant had originally planned to attack Curry Valley. There's a famous story in Sims and Roscoe's that he went to Ladies Hill. It's a mountain overlooking Curry Valley about a mile or so away. And he had a field glass, and he's watching for a while, and he's shocked to see that there's been a fort built. It's really bad. If you looked at it closely, they didn't know how to build a fort. It was a horrible thing. I don't think you could even shoot out from it. They'd forgotten to do that. And but also he sees a bunch of militia drilling, and he watches them for a while. They're really bad, but there's numbers of them. As it turns out, his children playing army with toy guns and sticks. And so he could have easily taken the community. As I said, they lost a lot of men over Oriskany, but Curry Valley's safe for now. Cobus Hill's doomed. And so he decides to go for Cobus, and then the story's been well told in a lot of histories. Mrs. Lawrence Lawyer, their farm is out of Cobus College, probably on the south side of the creek, maybe on the north side where the old quad is. Anyhow, she looks down to the creek and there's Indians down there. And she tells her husband, and they send somebody on horseback to tell the Continentals, and they go to Captain Brown, and they put out the word, assemble the militia. And there's 16 of them. There are more in the company. Probably a few men couldn't be found. They're farmers doing things. And also men had to do rotation duty in the forts, which meant there would have been 4 or 5 of them at that time in the fort, and anyhow doing their rotation duty. So anyhow, he manages to get 16 to assemble at his home, and scouts are set out everywhere to look for more Indians. And this marker, Brown's Farm, again, is, if you know the Cobusville area at all, it's at the intersection of Grover's Corners Road and Barnardville Road, about a mile outside of town from the old pizza hut in Cobusville. Price scalper, go out that way about a mile. So he assembles a militia up there. And interesting story behind the stone. It's actually found off of Washington Avenue in Cobusville, in the village, in somebody's backyard. Nobody knew. It was the only one there. Nobody knew where the grave was. Was it underneath? It was laying there. So they took it and they moved it next to his monument at the end of Grover's Corners Road. So he's actually buried several miles away from that. Anyhow, they got scouts out all over the place. And now the Continentals come up and join Christian Brown at his farm. That brings the force up to about 48 men. So they're getting bigger.
Do you want this map at all, or are you going to use that one?
Let's see. No, just this one. Thanks. Yeah, this one, for some reason, Brown's house showed up on it. When I imported this, it cut off one of the pictures, but then this picture came in and the house is on it, so this is way up on the upper right. And then they stay at Brown's for a day or two. Something I just found out too, John Harper, who had gotten the cavalry for the Battle of the Flockey, he's hearing these reports on the frontier, and he gets his family out of Curry Valley and moves them to the Mohawk Valley temporarily, and then he sends all the family's furniture and goods that he can get in a wagon to Middleburg and puts them in the middle fort. So he's got 2 horses and a wagon in Middleburg. Captain Patrick, Continental Yankee, comes in and takes the wagon and commandeers it for the army. He takes the wagon and 2 horses, and probably for all his camp equipment. That means his men are traveling with their tents, their cooking equipment. If they got the camp baggage, and I only know this because the wagon was burned and the horses were killed in the Battle of Cobusville, and Colonel Harper put in for damages 12 years later to see if he could get reimbursed. So, and the paper was out there, so I know the whole story how he took the wagon. Anyhow, so he's up there, a horse and wagon, the company baggage, 34 men, and now, 34, no, they got 50 men now. And then Captain Miller winds up traditionally he says he has Dwaynesboro militia, but actually I think what he is he's, some of those 4-man details at the forts are, they had to do his too, and he grabs 1 or 2 of those 4-man details, and he decides to go and see what's going on, and he shows up in Cobusville. Turns out he's a Tory. He'll eventually change sides, but he decides not to stay. Some of the men go with him. He's later dismissed for cowardice. At least 4 of his men stayed. So now the American force is up to about 54 at least. And then Captain Patrick now moves his command to George Warren's farm. And meanwhile, he had sent one of those scouting parties. He sent 2 men to Cherry Valley with a note. Again, Cherry Valley, they speak English. We only speak German here. But they sent a note up to Cherry Valley telling them that Indians have been sighted and be on your toes. And ironically, it was Cherry Valley that was going to get attacked first. And then those guys come in on the 28th. But meanwhile, 3 other men, Jacob Boris and his brother, Lieutenant Boris and his brother, and John Freemeyer. And they go about, some miles up the creek. And the story is that Freemeyer is sitting on a pile of driftwood fishing at the time. But anyhow, 2 Schoharie Indians that they know. That's Onasiak and Hanyeri. they come up and they surprise each other in the woods. It's like, hey, dude, what are you doing here? You know, and they get this little conversation going back. They're all speaking Mohawk, and then one of them, Onesiak, goes up and takes and grabs Joseph Boris' rifle and pulls it away from him and dumps the powder from the priming can, so it won't work. He says, and Yoyenari Yat Sagat, he says, I remember when he says, it's good if this is so. In other words, now the thing will fire. And Joseph grabs his gun and pulls the flint out and says the same thing, you know. And anyhow, then they get in a tussle and they're wrestling on the ground. The other Indian jumps on the other Boris and who manages to get away from him. And that Indian runs off and grabs his gun. That Indian runs off and he shoots the Indian wrestling with his brother, Onesiak. And so now Onesiak is dead. And they come back and they report the incident. And in the morning of May 30th, they're seen out in the fields, clearly want to be seen. And they want to lure people in there. Again, this part is famous in the local histories. Brown says they clearly want us to follow him. It's an ambush, it's a trap. And Captain Patrick says, what are you, a coward? Are you afraid? And again, there's this English-German thing going on. But anyhow, the Americans line up. According to the Continental survivors, only about 6 or 8 of the Americans actually participated. They said the rest just, you couldn't get them to do anything. It could be true, there's controversy there, but at least some of the militiamen said, no, I'm not going. And so it's most of the Continentals and a handful of militia on their right. They were stationed on the right of the Continentals. And they start skirmishing. As a matter of fact, they start skirmishing down. Originally, they just sent out skirmishers after these Indians, and they're shooting back and forth. Henry Schaefer comes in. He's shot in the back, but he's walking, and it was a spent bullet. They take off his vest and everything. They find the bullet lodged between his shirt and his vest. Got a heck of a bruise, but he can go on. So Henry will be one of the ones that takes part in the battle. But they're skirmishing into the forest, and sure enough, they walk into Grant. Is an expert at ambush. He laid one at Oriskany, and he does it again. It doesn't last too long. Captain Patrick immediately, when he sees all these people, he orders a bayonet charge. They're Continentals and they're trained with the bayonet, but he gets shot. His leg is broken, and 2 men try to help him. They get killed. He gets killed, and Lieutenant Maynard is captured. Famously for displaying a Masonic distress signal. But I'll go into that more in a minute. And then Captain Brown on the militia is in charge, and he says, his only order is get the heck out of here. Run. He orders a retreat. And it's a rout. John Furster gets pulled down by dogs, and these dogs, they turn up. And later in the battle, they turn up in other battles. One of these Indians had vicious dogs that fought for him. And the dogs bring down Furster and hold him until they can come up and kill him and take his scalp. And so these guys are just running for their lives, basically. Captain Brown and Sergeant Henry Schaefer had already been shot in the back, but they're running pretty good together, running for the Schoharie Valley, and they had to climb over a brush fence, and while they're going over, Schaefer took a bullet to the thigh, and he fell, and Captain Brown stopped to look at him. He says, get the heck out of here, go. And Brown, alive, is worth 20 pounds. His scalp is worth 8 pounds, because he's an officer. And so these Indians come and they look at Schaefer rolling on the ground, shot in the leg, and they probably thought, we'll come back for him. And they take off, they leave him, and they go for Brown, who outruns them. Meanwhile, Schaefer stands up, realizes his leg isn't broken, drops his gun and equipment, and hobbles off. And he then falls in with a brother-in-law who helps him as far as a mile or 2 outside of the village, Cobus, along some cliffs where it would be along Route 7 today, some low cliffs. And Schaefer can't go on. So the brother-in-law says, I'll go get help. And he goes in and he tells everybody, Schaefer's dead. Didn't send any help. Schaefer comes in 2 days later by himself. He's furious. Boy, relations between him and his brother-in-law were never the same. So, anyhow, and then Private Jonas Belknap, his story is the best known of all the Continentals because he moved to Cherry Valley after the war and was interviewed. for local history. And he had just turned 18 years old. He's out there fighting. He took a bullet in the side and managed to get off the field. And then when the rout starts and the killing starts, he sees a big hollow tree, and he crawled into it, and he stayed overnight. And he pulled himself out the next morning. He's hurt, he's stiff. And he sees a little cabin. They had burned the Cobus Kill, but they had left this little, it was probably the first cabin built on the farm in 1752, a temporary place. But it was being used. There's food on the table and a bed. They think they left it. They wanted to capture George Warner, who was a committee man. It was his farm. They figured if they left him one building, he'd come back and live there, and they might get him later. And they did 3 years later, actually. They took him prisoner, and then he got away, or he was released. Anyhow, so he's crawling for that house, and then all of a sudden, 2 Indians show up with a couple of dogs. And the Indians, they pause on the other side of a brush fence, and the dogs put their feet up on the fence and are growling at Belknap. He rolls into a pile of brambles, and the Indians are passing a bottle back and forth, and then they yell at the dogs and call, "Come on," you know. And so if they listened, paid attention to the dogs, they would have had Belknap. Unfortunately, they found one of the Jacob Schaefer that day. He had been wounded. One of the other men had helped him to hide behind a log. The Indians found him the next day and killed him. So he had made it through the night, only to be killed the next day. So Belknap survived the battle. So he goes into this cabin, finds a little food, crawls on the bed, passes out, and men coming out from the forts later that day find him and bring him back to the doctor in Millburg. And 5 men made a stand. That knoll is right near the intersection of Route 7 and where you get on I-88 in Warnerville. And the cemeteries, the old cemeteries behind it. But 5 men famously took shelter in the house. Supposedly, since they started at the house, everybody would be retreating to the house. 3 of the Continental soldiers and 2 of the militia, the Firster and Freemeyer, stayed in the house, and they've been glorified as making a last stand, buying time. They probably did save the lives of other people, because once they realized there were people in the house shooting at them, everybody turned their attention to the house. And I think also, from what I've read, they may have been a couple of wounded men in that house who couldn't get away. Wounded early in the battle, went back to the house. They can't run. And whatever. 2 men make a run for it, are shot and killed. 1 is famously butchered, which I won't go into. And the other 3 burned to death in the house, including Firster and Freemeyer. And the people of town, they all hear the fire. Nobody's got to tell them to get out of there. They all run, but a lot of them run into the forest. One of the Z girls, there's controversy there. One brother was killed in the Battle of Cobus Kill, but he's never really officially listed as being killed in the battle. He killed that day, but they think his other brother killed him. And Brant had visited their house that morning. One brother was a Tory who would later move to Canada. The other brother was in the militia and was going to go out and fight. The one Z boy is dead. The other boy winds up living in Canada after the war. But their sister, who was a young girl, maybe 10, 12 years old, she shows up days later down by Breakabee, so freaked out and terrified. She had missed all the forts, been wandering in the forest for days, so terrified that even though she lived to be in her 80s, she never spoke again. And but I'm wondering, maybe she didn't see one brother kill the other and just took off or whatever. But anyhow, Z Farm is gone. And meanwhile, the schoolmaster, another story, he's got a dozen of his school kids. He just takes off down the Cobus Kill Valley, down towards the valley. Mrs. Lawyer and her kids get lost. They wander in the woods for 3 days before they find their way out down in the valley. And so they're scattered all over the place. And most of the homes are burned. Jonathan Maynard, yeah, he supposedly, all the history books say that he displayed the Masonic distress signal and was spared. All the men around him were killed, and he would have been killed, but he's taken prisoner. So the history books have always said that he showed the distress signal then. But if you look at his Masonic website, his lodge, they say that he was taken prisoner, was about to be burned at the stake when he displayed the symbol. And I always dismissed it because I thought, well, that's so cliche. He was about to be burned at the stake, anything, you know. And they might not have known the story. They said he was taken by Indians, and that's what you always say. He was going to be burned at the stake. But then I recently found an account of another man taken prisoner by Brant, not at Cobusville, but another raid. All the prisoners were being brought to Unadilla. He got away, and when he got back, he said, there's a young Lieutenant Maynard down there, and they're treating him real bad. Now, if Brant had known he was a Mason, he wouldn't be being treated real bad. So it might be he waited until he was about to be killed at the stake and gave the sign. But whatever, he's a survivor. He's held prisoner for 2 years before being exchanged, and comes back. They put him in charge of a company. Then they send him back to Boston and give him a desk job for the rest of the war. But he goes on. There's a Jonathan Maynard Elementary School, Jonathan Maynard Boulevard. You go to Framingham, it's Jonathan Maynard. He's everywhere there. And so he went on, and that's the only picture. Everybody involved in Cobusville, I found one picture, and that's Jonathan Maynard in his old age. So this 6 Massachusetts, 34 men, 1 officer, 1 new musician, and 2 men survived. So 16 dead, 8 wounded, 4 captured, and and 6 who weren't hurt. Albany County Militia killed 6, wounded 3. And when it was all over, they had 2 officers and 5 men left. So these guys were devastated. Hard to find. Joseph Brant should have filed a report at the end of the campaign as a British officer, but John Butler was his commander. John Butler was really sick, and he wasn't taking any office work. So no official report ever got filed, but looking at the casualty list, at least 2 soldiers in Fry's company were killed. And normally when you have 2 killed, that would mean 6 or 8 wounded. There's always more, 2 or 3 times as many men wounded as killed. It seems to work that way. So they had some wounded. Another man died a couple of months later, could have been mortally wounded. And another man was dismissed from the service, could have been for wounds. So they took some casualties. Anyhow, that's the Rangers. And let's see, did I do the wrong? And the Indians, they lost a couple, including the Onus Yap, who was killed in the tussle. Anyhow, letters all over the place. Cobusville is destroyed. We hope you will send more reinforcement. Indians and Tories have made a descent upon Cobusville. And this is it. John Stark hated the militia. Never wanted to have anything to do with them. Said they won't fight. A lot of them didn't fight at Cobusville. So a company of Continentals were attacked by them, while a company of these militia patroons looked on, excepting 6 who behaved well. Some said 6, some said 8. But anyhow, apparently a number of the militia did not participate, and they might have been running when they were killed. They might not have been in the battle. So you can see it's a big deal. The word's going out all over. People are freaking out. And they left the old cabin of George Warner's. It was a little log schoolhouse that was not worth burning. The Schaefer farm across the creek, it was late in the day. They probably didn't want to get soaking wet to go over and burn it. And supposedly Captain Brown's farm and mill survived because a Tory named Summers, Reverend Summers' son, coveted them and thought after the war they would be his, and don't burn them. And then Molly Grant wrote to Daniel Klaus, also one of the Indian Department men, and Sir William Johnson's son-in-law. And they had a report of Joseph having a brush with the rebels. They don't know where. Cayuga chief said to be wounded, and then Schoharie Indian killed, 1 missing. And I did find another account, and just by accident, an Indian years later writing that his father was a chief and that he was killed either at Cobusville or the Flocky. Well, nobody was killed on their side of the Flocky. It has to be Cobusville. And I'm guessing he was mortally wounded, imagine these, wounded. And I'm guessing that he did not survive it. Anyhow, Brant said, what he wanted to do was sow confusion. What they want is George Washington, now the whole war is shifting south. George Washington is desperate for men. He just came off of Valley Forge. He's got his hands full. everybody in the North says the war is not here, it has to go to him. Now they can't do it. They got to hold regiments like the 6th Massachusetts. Now people are freaked out. So he's doing exactly what he's doing. He's keeping hundreds and hundreds of men from going to join George Washington. And he's everywhere. It's amazing. He's like 3 places on the same day, 30 miles, 50 miles apart. But the party's split up into little groups. And you can see this guy's got his men almost down to Breakabine, or almost to Cobusville, and he's, no, you got to go to Breakabine, marching back to Cobusville, down to Breakabine, no, you got to go. They're just marching back and forth, and they're exhausted. And then 100 Indians and Tories between Sacandaga and Johnstown, 10 men and 100 women and children locked in the church. They're all freaked out, only 10 men to defend them. North of Johnstown, and then they hear they're near Saudi Arabia, and then it says the enemy are divided into these 5 or 6 parties that appear and attack us in different directions. Party north side of the river, obviously, General Herkimer's, it just goes on and on. All these reports coming in, they're everywhere. And again, the population is freaked, they're all starting to come in. Sergeant O'Connor Hickson is one of the 6 survivors of Patrick's company, and they send him to Fishkill in June. He returns with 22 men, 9-month levies, and then what happens is 6 Massachusetts now famously does not go to George Washington, doesn't go to West Point where they might have put it for defense. It goes to the Mohawk Valley. First to Stanwix, and then to Curry Valley. And where Libby, famously, the Curry Valley Massacre. Battlefield today, college fields. Down on the lower left, down in here. So I've been working with the metal detector. I got them numbered here. But George Warner's farm is right up here. This is the cemetery. This is Route 7. This is I-88. But anyhow, George Warner's farm. But the soldiers left the farm. I think they went out this way. They were picking up musket balls and debris with the metal detectors. They come along here and they're ambushed about here. And then they route. Interesting, I found that this part of the creek, this seems to be full of giant tangled trees that are, in the floodplain, many of them with hollow trunks. I could just see Jonas Belknap hiding in one of those trees, and then down here is the remains of an old cabin, which might have been the cabin he took refuge in. That would all make sense. So, anyhow, we're doing picking up the debris. This is Cobusville High School, Cobusville Richmondville High School, and then this is the I-88 entrance, just for reference. And so it's all college fields, and when the corn comes off, we'll be out there again with the detectors and see what else we find. So. And I end with the monument to Captain Christian Brown, Cobusville, at the end of Grover's Quarters Road, and that's where his farm and mills. It's cool. There's a bottomless pond there. It comes out from a swamp 2 miles north. And nobody's ever found the bottom. They've had scuba divers down there, but they say it's all tangled trees. You could only get so far. But anyhow, that's the creek begins right there, and his mill was on it. So the boulder, the bottomless pond, is just behind that boulder. And then the other one, Captain William Patrick, was put up in Canton. He was from Stoughton, Massachusetts. Later became Canton. And it says right on the marker, killed at Cobusville, May 31st, 1778. Anyhow, that concludes it. No, I'm sorry if I went a little long.
It's excellent.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Any thought to putting a historical marker near there?
Yeah. What's that?
Any thought to putting a historical marker near the battle site?
Oh, yeah. There's a bone of contention. Other people, excuse me. Years ago, when they were planning in Cobusville Richmondville High School, the marker mysteriously disappeared. That happens a lot. Anytime anybody's going to do construction anyway, the first thing that happens is the historical marker disappears. And so that marker disappeared for at least 6 years. And then the school was built, and it came back. But it's almost a half a mile from where it was. And some people contend that that's the right spot. It's too far out, and then so there was a marker. It would be out, if you know the area of the car wash out there. It should be right in front of the car wash, and then directing out into the fields there. And yes, I want to do a marker. Somebody approached me yesterday. I was at another marker ceremony in Richmondville. He says he's got the boulder if we can get the plaque. And he said they got the boulder all donated. And so I was thinking of a boulder and a plaque right on Route 7, very close to where the North Warner House was, and then we're burned. So working on it, yeah. Thanks for asking. Yes.
When did the Becker House Middle Fork come down?
What's that?
When did the Becker House / Middle Fork come down?
In the 1930s or 40s. There's a photograph of it in an old historical review.
Oh,
And I used to work with a guy years ago, a very poor family. He said he was born in that house. And that if he got that story right, he was still standing, and he was probably born in early 1940s, maybe.
is that at the end of Middle Fork Road?
Where was it?
Yeah.
There's a marker in Middleburg. They just put up a whole bunch of new apartment buildings and stuff right there. It's right there. It's all right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that he was asking, was that the end of Middle Fort Road?
Around there, I know where it is.
Yeah, it's out. Yeah, Middle Fork Road is there. Yeah, it's in that whole area. It was a stockade. I'm not sure exactly where the house was in there, but anyhow, it's in that general area. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, so what hits my mind is, it seems like there were quite a few people already here by the 1700s.
Yeah.
Were they still coming from Europe, or were a lot of them born here by that time?
That's a good question. You had a lot of Germans originally. It's Germans in there, and then the Dutch start trickling in from Albany and Schenectady in the 1720s and 30s. So out around where the Apple Barrel is and the George Mann Tavern, those are the roads to Albany, and they're kind of hang out there. Although Romans were Dutch, they came in early. And but when you look at Cobusville settlement, right now the Germans are coming into Philadelphia and coming north, and I don't quite get that. George Warner was born in Germany, went to Pennsylvania, came north. Must have been there was word that this land was available, and there was some contention with the land and stuff in Pennsylvania, but a lot of the Cobusville people were born in Germany. So they're still coming in, and again, I don't understand that Pennsylvania to New York migration exactly. Others, like the Schaefer boys, second generation Germans, they were from the Hudson Valley. The Youngs family was from Schenectady. So yeah, a lot of them were second and third generation Germans, but still some born in Germany. And hardly any English. Nobody's speaking. There's one name on the old stone fort. The people who built that building were Dutch Reform, German Reform. They carved their names in the building in 1772. Everybody's German or Dutch except a Campbell. Where the heck did they come from? So, anyhow, yeah. So there are still there don't seem to be many English or anybody like that. It still seems to be German and Dutch. Yes.
Where was John Harper's farm in Harpersfield?
I'm really kind of deaf.
Where was John Harper's farm in Harpersfield?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I was thinking I'd like to go up there and find out. Yeah, it's Harper's Field,
Yeah.
but I don't know exactly. And those are New Englanders. Those are Yankees. They speak English. So yeah, they did wind up with a lot of Tories from the Charlotte Valley. John Harper's one of the few that again are going with the Patriots.
I feel like there might be there's a few historic markers on 23 in Harpersville, and I feel like one of them is near Mama Maria's,
Yeah.
in that area. I'm not sure if that's.
Yeah, I'm gonna go up there and check that out.
Where that old tavern is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll go too.
Yeah.
There's a database online. There's a volunteer database.
This was great, just the level of research and amount of detail.
Yeah.
You can go online and see
It's
that.
phenomenal. It's so great.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. I hope I didn't go into too much detail.
No, that's it.
Yeah, it's interesting, some of this stuff. I love the part about putting the prisoners on the roof of the house.
Yeah.
You buy this stuff. Yeah, good ones for them. They're not gonna,
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, it was great.
Thanks for coming.
Think of that again, you know, it's not like now, if you're in a really bad house fire or something and you're on the second floor or whatever, you can take a chance jumping off, because eventually, kind of as you saw like this.
Yeah.
But they couldn't do that back then.
No, yeah.
They
Broken
stopped.
ankle, you got a bone stick in your